No amount of charismatic training or cognitive behavioral bullshit is going to help you overcome your social anxiety, because at this stage in your journey, we don't need to focus on awkwardness at parties, or shyness in romantic situations, or even your overwhelming crowded spaces, if that's going to mean us neglecting the underlying issue of annihilation anxiety, which is wrapped around and at the absolute center of social dysfunction. In a single sentence, it might be quite shocking to hear, but what if your social anxiety were actually existential anxiety? What if we're not dealing with a fear of other people, but a terror which trembles both beneath and beyond the social sphere? What if your real worry wasn't this level of group identity, but your private ambivalent concerns towards yourself when you're lying in bed, awake with your complexities? Or what if we expanded it in the opposite direction, and it's your confusion and uncertainty about the unknowable mystery of God and existence? What if we went in both directions? That's what we're going to do in this video, because I don't believe that we can answer questions like this one, especially for people who've been suffering from social anxiety for many years and have tried many things, if we're going to remain fixed on the social level. We need to look in two directions. We need to go all the way inwards and all the way outwards, because ultimately the question of whether or not you're comfortable in a group environment is a question of whether you're comfortable with yourself and whether you're comfortable with the process of life itself. You cannot be in a position, as Alexander Lowen very aptly puts in his very well titled book here, Fear of Life, where you allow the neuroticism of existential anxiety to consume you, and then dress up your neuroticism with various ways of being more charming or relaxing yourself in a stress management sense. But let's let Alexander Lowen take it off with the first of 3 books which I'm going to be bringing forwards in this episode, which hopefully will help you overcome your social anxiety. Again, Fear of Life by Alexander Lowen, and this book is over 40 years old, but we've got our opening quote right there on the front page. Alexander Lowen's words: "Neurosis is not usually defined as a fear of life, but that is what it is. The neurotic person is afraid to open his heart to love, afraid to reach out or strike out, and afraid to be fully himself. We can explain these fears psychologically. Opening one's heart to love makes one vulnerable to being hurt. Reaching out to being rejected, striking out to being destroyed. But there is another dimension to this problem. More life or feeling than one is accustomed to is frightening to the person because it threatens to overwhelm his ego, flood his boundaries, and undermine his identity. Being more alive and having more feeling is scary." First book of 3 books, but let's jump into the second book, The New Primal Scream by Arthur Janov, another multi-decade-old therapy book which actually contradicts Lowen's position about neurosis, and I'm going to tie all this together in just 1 minute. But Arthur Janov has a particularly striking way of talking about anxiety, which I really feel is worth going into. From page 236, The Antidote to Anxiety. Quote from the book: "Access to early imprints finally gives the therapist a window into the source of states of anxiety and tension. It allows us to pinpoint how and when the neurosis began. It allows us to search below the level of ideas into generating sources. Feeling pain is the plain and simple antidote for anxiety states. It has been a systematic and predictable resolution for anxiety in many thousands of patients." And there's a whole chapter specifically on anxiety in this book, which continues much in the same direction. You can't overcome anxiety if you're trying to manage or bypass the anxiety itself. You must go deeper into the state, and that means looking beneath and beyond the fear which keeps you captive. In the introduction, I pointed out 2 directions, which is the fully introverted, introspective self-discovery stage, and the fully transpersonal, some would call this the spiritual dimension, where you look towards God and the meaning of existence itself. I would argue that until you've resolved to at least 80% degree of comfort, your fear of death, your fear of life, your major philosophical question of why me, why here, why this, what's the point of it all, and who am I, what am I, how am I, where's my shadow, where's my light, what's the point of worrying about who you are in a group? It's much more exciting, and I imagine for almost every single person who likes what I do on this channel, you're probably not too squeamish at the idea of sitting down with yourself and journaling or looking into a mirror or realizing that maybe you should spend a few more years getting introspective. Of course, I'm not being dualistic, I'm not saying give up the social environment, but we're talking about healing and overcoming the root causes of social anxiety and liberating your authentic self, which means that you need to address all of the fragmentation that would lead you to being a false self. This is when we have a true self, which is wrapped in layers of persona and performance. We need to strip those back, because just layering on a new mask for the higher quality, higher status version of you that gets all of the wonderful feedback from the men and women in the social environments, that's just going to create more and more disconnect from the absolute core of who you are. Complex issue, the persona is still authentic, but many people, when they're dealing with social anxiety, will create fake or pseudo personas to fit the needs of the environment. And this doesn't work. If you've ever put on a particular outfit to go into a particular scenario which you're uncomfortable about, maybe for the first couple of minutes or even the first couple of hours you'll feel like you're at home. But that's assuming that you genuinely want to be in that environment and that you have a genuine ability to connect with the other people in the environment, which is impossible if not only you do not want to connect with the environment because you have a fundamental fear of life and you have a distaste towards existence itself, which is a common feeling of alienation, an incredibly common experience right now, to be alienated from other people. But the first step is to hopefully dissolve the alienation that you feel towards yourself. This is going to be a mixture of parts work, trauma work, inner child work, shadow work, generally working with the subpersonalities that exist inside of you and trying to gradually bring together a sense of cohesion and a sense of fluidity with the many sides and many aspects of your identity, which as a whole will create your feeling of being an authentic self. I've got many videos on this channel which cover these topics in far more detail, but fundamentally you resolve social anxiety by being social with yourself first. And this means creating a relationship with yourself from ego to soul, backwards from soul to ego, from ego to persona, from persona back towards soul, and all of it together should get you inch by inch towards your authentic self. It's not an easy process to explain because, of course, why would it be? You also then need to be bivalent in your observations of the world, which means, where is God? What's your relationship with God? Does that word even bring up triggering and trauma inside of you? Unfortunately, many people were raised in situations where the education around godliness, or at the very least a higher power of one form or another, was attached with a lot of retribution and punishment and control and abuse. I'm not talking about those kinds of situations. I do not agree with them in the slightest. But you need to have a compelling reason to want to be here. You need to see your place in the cosmos. You need to have a generally optimistic and abundant relationship with the universe. That might be the most new age sentence I've said all month. Hopefully it will be the last. You need to have that. If you don't have that, then the phase before the full expansion into everything, i.e. the social situation, will just feel pointless. It will feel pointless, and if the pointlessness is met with an unresolved anxiety and unsafety from childhood, then it will just become a clown world, alienating, stressful, overstimulating experience which cannot be resolved with any degree of anxiety management techniques. But nonetheless, I'm going to be a contradiction in this video and bring out the third book of today's episode, which is some neurobiology from Robert Scare, The Body Bears the Burden, dealing with trauma, dissociation, and disease. And there is a wonderful extract about how to actually work with anxiety in a truly therapeutic manner. Again, it's not a quick fix, but it's the fix, and the fix does take time because healing takes time. Quote from the book from Robert Scare. Again, this is neurobiology, so this is looking into looks at whiplash a lot in this book, but also dissociation and trauma in a more general sense. Very high level book. It's kind of dense, but bear with me, it's a worthwhile quote. Quote from the book. Techniques directed towards anxiety management have also been employed extensively in PTSD treatment. These techniques are designed to develop coping skills and lessening arousal and anxiety, and generally involve body training exercises often supplemented with biofeedback. Examples include deep muscle relaxation, breathing exercises, thought stopping, cognitive restructuring, covert modeling, and stress inoculation. These are some of the classic anxiety management techniques, right? All of these techniques employ active intervention by the patient in diminishing painful somatic or emotional symptoms through learned techniques of self-regulation designed to control or diminish that part of the trauma cycle involving arousal. Put simply, these are all different ways of calming yourself down because you had difficult situations in your childhood where you were frequently not very calm and things were frequently quite up. This is what you need to do. Continuing with the quote. However, they do not address symptoms of avoidance and dissociation. Indeed, it is theoretically possible that a number of these techniques might enhance dissociative tendencies as an unwanted effect on relief from the arousal symptoms, since the only objective measure for success are based on the reduction of measures or symptoms of psychological arousal. Final quote, final sentence. Nevertheless, studies combining anxiety management and exposure techniques seem to show that a combination of these approaches might be useful supplemental treatment for chronic PTSD and complex trauma. And here we are into the number one question: are you going to manage your anxiety, or are you going to resolve your anxiety? Robert Scare has the directional invitation. You can learn body breathing, you can learn focusing techniques, you can learn how to gradually expose yourself to more and more stressful environments and gradually reduce the various projections and various intensities of the new social setting. Or you can focus all of that energy towards the unstable annihilation anxiety, which was often, unfortunately, tragically seeded in unsafe family environments. Your mother or your father, or God forbid, maybe both of them, did not give you a feeling in social connection as one-to-one or one-to-both parents that it was okay to be who you actually are, or even that they were very okay as who they were. Dysfunction was baked in from day one. Doesn't mean that our parents are awful people, doesn't mean that they're not deserving of respect and compassion, even if awful things have happened. I'm not trying to get into a blaming conversation, but to address the literal origin of most childhood traumas, generalized for the sake of a video, we are lacking safety, we are lacking trust, and we are lacking the strength to be ourselves, knowing that it will be accepted by those who are meant to be taking care of us. The social anxiety, the social dysfunction, and the general disordered thinking and hyper-arousal of being in a group dynamic where you feel like everyone's watching you, or you're completely screwing up all of the interactions that you're in. If you just take the time to look back, it's probably seated in something that happened when you were 4, when you were 8, or when you were 10 years old, or maybe, unfortunately, many of those instances complexly stacked up over time. This is when you might be in complex PTSD territory, and you can see just how, in these 3 books alone, which really are just a sample of probably at least 50 books I could have brought out on this topic, there are so many different ways to approach social anxiety, but the fundamental thing is you need to remember that it's probably an existential anxiety and unresolved childhood trauma, both at the individual level and in your relationship to the higher power, whatever you want to call that. You can put your energies towards that middle sphere and get limited results or even amazing results, but I do not want you to be in the position where you're in your 40s or your 50s, having figured out how to socialize and make all of these wonderful, high-impact, high-status, worldly connections, and then go to the bathroom between the interactions, look yourself in the mirror, and see a stranger you do not love or do not respect. Because that is built on a healthy internal relationship to yourself, which often is not a common experience for most people. In fact, I saw a recent statistic in a book that was published in the 1970s, I forget the name of the book, saying that an estimated 1 to 5 out of 100 children actually had a healthy, mutually loving relationship to both of their parents. And that was in the 1970s, and I would argue that things have gotten worse. So what do we do? Do we try and go into all these new social environments as broken people, trying to connect with other broken people? Or do we take the time to introspectively, therapeutically heal ourselves by looking at the undercurrents, addressing the annihilation anxiety, and hopefully resolving at least 80% of our neurosis so that we can be the healing light in the social situations, and we need not be loud about it. You need not go and preach the benefits of inner work to everyone in every room that you enter, but your energy will be distinct. You will be simultaneously the example and also the inspiration for more healing of more deeper anxieties in all of the wonderful relationships that you'll build if you focus on the truly internal and the truly otherworldly and reconcile your relationship with both. You need to feel like God's on your side, and you need to feel like you're on your own side. Otherwise, you're going to really feel like nobody's on your side at all. Because if we're taking all three factors of yourself, the social environment, and God, even if you fix the social environment, you are flanked with mistrust and speculation, and honestly, a hell of a lot of fear. Again, for this video, I recommend that you could turn to Alexander Lowen and his bioenergetics in Fear of Life. You can look at Arthur Janov and his Primal Scream, or you can look at The Body Bears the Burden, but really, these books are placeholders for neurobiological trauma work, for cathartic primal therapy, and for the bioenergetic response of looking at your bodily signals and sensations and realizing that all physical dysfunctions have emotional components of repressed trauma and a variety of other very specific situations that you can learn about and resolve in your own time and at your own pace. Fundamentally, social anxiety is a massively crippling issue. If you've watched all the way to the end and think that I'm being dismissing of social anxiety as something which is really not a thing at all, it's not what I'm saying, but I'm trying to add a new element to the conversation, which isn't just anxiety management. I don't want us to manage issues, I want us to resolve issues. And I think that means going in a bit of a different direction. So I hope you've enjoyed the direction I took in this video. And of course, I will see you on the next one, where we're going to take a whole new direction on a whole new topic. I'll see you over there.